Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this panel on AI in the financial sector, opportunities and challenges. I'm Catherine Carlson. I'm a finance reporter with Politico based in Brussels. So where do we stand at the moment? Well, AI is already reshaping how financial institutions operate, and it's pushing regulators to catch up. Whether it's for market analysis, risk management, customer service, or cybersecurity, the technology has the potential to substantially impact the financial system. But while there's plenty of momentum, the landscape is uneven. Some firms are scaling fast, others are still in the exploratory phase. And even as we hear about AI's benefits, critical questions remain about operational risks, algorithmic bias, the robustness of predictions, and the potential impacts for financial stability of the technology. Now, it's a timely moment to be having this conversation as the regulatory and supervisory agenda picks up. At the EU level, the AI Act introduces a risk-based framework, with some requirements starting to apply from this year. Financial institutions will soon need to meet stringent requirements for high-risk systems, including around data quality, transparency, human oversight, and cybersecurity, with high penalties for non-compliance. At the same time, initiatives like DORA are placing AI within the broader scope of ICT and operational risk. And in the EU and beyond, regulators and other authorities are examining how to promote the safe, ethical, and effective use of AI, as well as how to harmonize laws and guidelines across jurisdictions. And financial services firms are working on how best to harness the potential of AI to strengthen their operations, while also navigating a new technological and regulatory landscape that's changing day by day. So that's the boring overview from me done. Opportunities, risks, how to manage them, where this is all heading. We're going to dig into some of those themes in our discussion today. But that's enough from me. Let me introduce our panel. So we have Pierre-Olivier Bouet, Executive Vice President and Head of Financial Services Europe at Capgemini. We have Frédéric Tardy, General Manager at Microsoft France. We have Valérie Baudson, CEO of Amundi. And we have Rama Kant, Professor and Chair of Mathematical Finance at the University of Oxford. So thank you very much for being here with me today. First of all, let's dig into thinking about the opportunities that AI can bring to the sector. So Rama, I'm going to come to you first. Talk me through, from your sense, what kind of opportunities you see from the use of AI in finance. I mean, is this bringing more capabilities? What's the picture looking like there?
Thank you. So let me first start by specifying what we're talking about here, because AI is an often used word, but non-specialists may not know exactly what that covers. So specialists prefer to talk about machine learning, which is more precise. So basically, what we're talking about here is a set of algorithms that have the capacity to learn from their interaction with data or with users. So this distinguishes them from classical algorithms that have been used for a very long time that are static in the sense that they will always do the same thing whenever you use them on the same data. So here, these algorithms learn, and the learning is what distinguishes them, and the learning has some analogies with what intelligent beings do, hence the name artificial intelligence. Now, this corpus of algorithms recovers vastly different techniques. Historically, the first ones to be deployed in general and in finance were what we call supervised learning algorithms. So you have a large data set of labeled data. For example, you have a large database of credit card transactions, and you know that some of them were fraudulent. They're labeled as fraudulent. You can train such a learning algorithm to learn to recognize patterns which have been seen in these fraudulent transactions. So that's an application to fraud detection. This is one of the first historically deployed in the financial services, more than maybe around 20 years ago it started. So this is the idea of supervised learning, needs large labeled data sets. Then you have a second category of algorithms, which is unsupervised learning algorithms. So here you have large databases, but they're not labeled. And you don't know a priori what's in there, but you think there's something interesting in there. So unsupervised learning algorithms explore data. They try to uncover structure, and they may uncover structure which you're not aware of previously. So this has lots of potential, because in finance we have lots of data. And so this is being deployed progressively and has been deployed a lot in areas of finance where there's lots of data. Retail finance, we have lots of data. Think of loan, credit scoring, things. Intraday, high frequency data, again, lots of data there. Things like credit card, consumer data. So here are areas where this has been deployed and is currently still being deployed. Third type of algorithm is, so the first two are big data algorithms. This is what people have heard of a lot. The third type of algorithm is called reinforcement learning algorithms. These are algorithms where you may not have any data or very little data, and the goal is not to recognize patterns or forecast something, but to learn, to teach the computer to execute a certain task by learning, by iterating trial and error, just as a child learns to walk or talk. So they repeat some task until, and you have a way of telling the computer whether it's doing the right thing, and it will learn to do a certain task. For example, famous examples that people have heard of is AlphaGo, Alpha Chess. You know, a computer learns to play Go or chess or any other game, not by looking at what humans have done, but just by playing with itself. So this has a lot of potential, and this type of approach doesn't necessarily require a lot of data, because you can train these algorithms in a sandbox. And this hasn't been deployed a lot in finance, but some players have started to look at this for tasks like trade execution or other tasks related to trade operations and market operations, for example. And the fourth type of algorithm, which is probably the most well-known now, is generative algorithms. So generative algorithms do not try to find a pattern or forecast something or do a certain task. They simulate outputs which look like the data that they have seen in the training database. So you take a large database of something, texts, arrays, balance sheets, videos, whatever you would like to simulate, and you train these algorithms to simulate other outputs which look like this, the ones in the data, but they're not exactly like the ones in the data. So they're not just going to give you one of the data points you have already observed, but something that looks like that. For example, you train them on millions of pictures of animals, and they're going to generate a picture of some animal. It's not a real animal. It looks like something which resembles an animal, but it's not a picture of a real animal. And the most famous examples of these are the generative pre-trained transformers, or GPTs, which are used to simulate speech and discourse, human-like discourse. But it's not restricted to speech, and examples here of generative models which can be used in finance and are being used in finance are generative models which are used to simulate scenarios for risk. So in the same way as current simulation methods are used, but in a way that is completely model-free. So you have lots of data. You ask the model, look at this data for yield curves or stock prices or whatever, and learn to generate scenarios which look like that. So you can have, there are many powerful applications of this. So all of these have been used to some degree in financial applications. One of the obstacles to their more widespread use, so you can ask why is not everybody using this all the time, if they're so powerful, is that typically these are black box type models. So they do impressive things, but people don't always know exactly how. And this is an obstacle to the deployment of them in regulated areas of activity, such as healthcare and finance, because there is a model validation process for the adoption of new models, and people need to understand a little bit what's going on in these black boxes before they deploy them in a situation where they can lead to decisions and so on. So they can be used to design data-driven systems, so fully data-driven decision systems from A to Z, where some system looks at data, makes a decision or a forecast, and then there is an action which is then executed through an automated procedure. or what is currently more done in finance is as decision aid tools. So they make a forecast or they recognize the pattern, but then some human actor needs to act upon it or validators or something like that. So this is this is some kind of panorama of the techniques, and I think our colleagues will tell you more how they're being deployed in financial institutions.
Well, thank you so much for that very comprehensive overview. Pierre-Olivier, I'm going to come to you now. From your perspective, what's the current usage landscape looking like? I mean, are we really seeing a take-up of AI?
Thank you. AI right now is in transition, and it applies to financial services. It applies more widely to all the different sectors of industries. It's in transition between a world of experimentation, sometimes at small scale, but also sometimes at larger scale, to a world of how do you move into what Rama was mentioning as mainstream adoption. How do you move to a place where, given notably the emergence of Gen AI, which has created something interesting, which is more accessibility to AI than before, and you also now have agentic AI, which is also helping manage processes. So you're in a world right now where we are between the experimentation and the adoption. And it's going fast, but it's not going as fast as it could go, and I'm going to go through it now. If you're in financial services, as mentioned by Rama, if you step back 1 second about financial services, what do financial services do? They price and they allocate resources and risk. And to do so, you need data, you need intensive set of data to help with decision making. You are using mathematical and probabilistic models to get to your decision making. And you are using a lot of computational power because you've been building large-scale computational power to drive your operations. So by nature, financial services is a very fertile area for AI. And that's why financial services, from our perspective, is really among the sectors which are moving the fastest on AI. Where are they moving? Well, if I focus now on financial markets, specifically within financial services, where are they moving? Well, they're moving everywhere, across the board, across the value chain. But if you step back 1 second, the first areas where people were comfortable testing using AI, Gen AI, other model, machine learning, etc., are the areas which were most remote from the outside and most likely to be only internally focused. So you see a lot of activities around personal productivity, and you've all heard the word Copilot. I'm citing your product, Frederic, and others. So all this mature industry-based solution, which you can bring and give to the employees for them to reduce the time they spent on a very repetitive task. I mean, getting data on a paper or managing answers to email, which are generic emails, but also accessing information within the company, policies, data, knowledge, so that was the first layer which went very well, and a lot of things are happening there. The other layer where also a lot happening is around IT development, because it's the same thing. You bring this to development to help across the life cycle. And Rama, you mentioned generating scenarios for risk management. You can also generate scenarios for testing in a way which is very effective and can help being more effective. That's the first layer. The second layer is around back office and middle office processes, where if you step back, it's about extracting data and managing data, and then injecting them more or less automatically into workflows. And that's where you can also apply artificial intelligence to extract data and make the workflows work. And I can cite examples around onboarding of clients, KYC. We've been doing a lot of work around KYC. There's also client servicing, answering email, doing reconciliation, plenty of things in the middle and back office areas happening. And this is progressively moving towards the front office. And to give you an example of what we do at Capgemini, we have managed recently to find a way to use AI, Gen AI, to deal with something which takes time sometimes at the trading desk, which is P&L alignment, P&L reconciliation. So a lot is moving in the area where you have to use data and you have to work to move workflows. The third area is, of course, risk management, compliance, areas where, in fact, a lot of machine learning has been used at the beginning of the 2020s and even earlier. And there is a space to do more because it's about managing data, doing mathematical analysis. So you have it in risk management. You mentioned credit scoring. We can go through fit-for-purpose product analysis. You also have everything about AML, about finding out where you have discrepancies, where you have a gap, where you have behavioral patterns that could give you a sense of what's happening and how people are trying to somehow cheat the system and go around the controls. And the last one I've kept for the last is client interaction, which is when you are in front of the client, what do you do? And this is where you see the latest development around somehow a personal assistant to the people in front of the client, be it a way of creating pitch elevators, generating ideas. I'm sure, Valérie, you'll talk about investment generation of ideas. So all these areas are new. You also have everything around contact center, because with the advent of agentic AI and Gen AI, there's a lot you can do also in terms of language usage and the way people are interacting with contact center and the way you can automate this process and you can refocus people on more value-added tasks. That's really the list of areas. I show you the potential, so everybody is saying it's great, but now the real issue is how do you move from this potential to the reality of capturing the potential and making it real in terms of adoption. And this is where we are right now, is moving from all this experimentation to something which is adoption, and that's where, for any financial service company, it's difficult, because financial services companies, for most of them, are not AI native companies. They are based on a long history of legacy system, a lot of layers being built, stack of technology being built, data which sometimes are well-structured, sometimes are less well-structured, and it makes it difficult, and that's really where we are right now. The point is, how do we move from and capture all the potential from this, all the potential from customer experience, all the potential in terms of what it can be, but also all the potential in terms of productivity it brings, because at the end of the day, basically it needs to have a return, which makes sense in terms of investment and return. And that's where we are, and I'm sure we'll talk about what it will take to overcome all the obstacles. And I haven't mentioned all the issues around trust, control, which also need to be addressed, which are going to be very important.
Thank you very much. Valerie, I'm going to come to you now. You obviously have a wealth of experience from the asset management sector specifically. Could you talk me through what the use of AI is looking like in this sector?
Well, you will find a few examples which are related to Pierre-Olivier, very excellent demonstrations. First, I would like to tell you, to give two disclaimers ahead of my speech. The first one is that in the financial industry, the security of the data is absolutely essential, not only in the financial industry, of course, but at least for me, it's one of the key points. So what we did at Amundi to make sure that we embrace the opportunities of AI was first to develop and secure an environment where we were absolutely certain that all teams had secure access to the data, could use the data of the company securely, and the AI engines that we are providing them as well. That's the first, I think, essential step to take. And it took probably more than 1 year, but we now have our 6,000 staff all around the world in the 35 countries in which we operate, who have on their desk this secure environment, which is called Alto Studio. Second disclaimer I would like to give you before giving you some examples of what we do is there are several red lines, but one red line is no investment decision can be taken without a human decision. Doesn't mean that we do not use AI, I will come back to it, to get the best analysis and decision we can. But at the end of the day, there is something which is forbidden. It's the fact to invest any money without a human intervention. So now, looking at the 3 years, let's say from 22 to 24, 25, where we really worked a lot on all these topics. On our side, there were 4 areas in which we made significant progress. they are quite different from the one to the other. First one, improvement in the client servicing, and especially retail client servicing. This is not dedicated to the financial industry, but it's very important because especially here in France at Amundi, we have a huge employee savings scheme business with something like 6 million clients. We get more than 2,100 questions, which are most of the time the same ones, quite simple ones. So we improved very significantly the reactivity of answer and the quality of answer to our final end clients. And now our teams are handling, 70% of the questions are handled directly because they are so simple and always the same. And 30%, 30 of the questions are handled by our teams because they are more complex or requires more search. Second example, automation of essential but heavy controls. In a company like Amundi, where we manage thousands of funds, thousands of prospectus, tens of thousands of marketing material, once again in 35 countries with different regulation, we need to make sure that everything we say to our client is compliant with what is in the prospectus and with what our regulators authorized us to do. So it was a huge job in a company like Amundi to handle these controls. It was imperfect because honestly too big. So the AI use was instrumental on that front. We are now reconciling directly all our prospectus with all our marketing material everywhere in the world automatically. And our compliance teams, instead of reading billions of pages of marketing materials, either digital or paper, are now focusing only on what is spotted as a discrepancy and spend their time on making sure that all these discrepancies are obviously deleted and updated extremely rapidly. So that was a huge gain in time and also a huge gain in security of the control on that front. Third example, of course, at the heart of our business, which is to analyze information and data to make good investment decisions, the fact to use AI was absolutely instrumental in enhancing the analysts, enhancing our portfolio manager, in getting the right data at the right level at the right moment. We have, for instance, a research platform which is standardizing more than 10 years of corporate research on the 18,000 companies in which we invest in the world, and which help them to be correctly informed both on the history and on what's happening right now, and which obviously help them to make better decisions. We also use alternative data like satellite imagery, for instance, for ESG purpose. It's very important and it's extremely powerful to complete the analysis that we can have through data with, I would say, data that we would have never used again 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. And which are complementary to what we used to do. And last but not least, of course, it's bringing as well productivity and efficiency in producing information, some material, and even IT code. A few examples, very concrete, answering RFPs. In a company like Amundi, we answer thousands of RFPs a year, so we make sure that we use efficiently the tools we have to bring the right information to our clients when we answer the RFPs. Writing legal contracts, of course, it's an incredible help and an incredible accelerator. Production of marketing material, the link with the topic I was mentioning before, or digital marketing material. And last but not least, producing IT code on some parts, which can be, once again, productivity gains. So on all these topics, it has accelerated two rules: make sure that all your staff has a secure environment to do so, and put red lines on what you can do and what you can't do until the end with AI.
Thank you so much. Frederick, I'm going to come to you now. Obviously, you're coming to this issue from sort of the other side of the conversation. Also thinking about uptake, I mean, how much would you say that financial institutions are effectively using AI? And do you think that they're taking, let's say, ownership of the technology and making as much use of it as they could?
So first, I fully agree with Valérie. I think that regarding decision in banking, they should be always human-centric. Pierre-Olivier mentioned Copilot. We didn't call the tool at Microsoft Autopilot. It's Copilot because there is always a human behind the machine. Regarding shortage of AI talent, I think that we are extremely lucky in France because we have the best AI engineers. It's good news because if during the digital era, we didn't have always the best talents, but for AI, clearly, look at Mistral in France. If you look at American startups, they are recruiting in France. If you could look at large companies such as Microsoft, you have always French engineers. So I think that we are extremely lucky to have these engineers in AI. I think that where we need to improve is that it's like if you have a restaurant, we have a lot of 3-star Michelin chefs, but we don't have many people in the kitchen. So we need really to train citizens, to train employees to use AI to make sure that we can industrialize. For example, when ChatGPT appeared 3 years ago, France was the first country in the usage of LLM, so fantastic. If we look at today, we are the 16th country, and clearly the US is much quicker in the usage of industrializing LLMs. Pierre-Olivier mentioned contact centers. For example, if you call a contact center in the US, a human will answer, which is good news, but AI will give the answer, will document the answer, and in a contact center now, instead of having 50% of fully right answers, you have 80%, which is much quicker, much more efficient, and of course you can do a cross-selling and upselling much quicker. So I will say the most important thing in France and among the banks and insurance companies is training. So, for example, at Microsoft, we train on AI 30 minutes per day. So it's like a language. You need to practice to be efficient, and we do that with partnerships. At Microsoft, we plan to train 1 million people in France, and for example, we are working with Crédit Agricole, with Simplon to really train technicians and in AI. We are also doing that with BNP Paribas and other banks. So training will be key to make sure that we can industrialize AI in banking and insurance.
Thank you so much. Now, obviously, this is a conference on finance. This is the finance sector we're talking about. There's no use in talking about the opportunities without also thinking about the risks. So let's get into that. Rama, talk me through what your sense is of the potential financial stability risks from widespread AI use. I mean, is this doom-mongering, or is it a real thing that we need to be concerned about?
Thank you. So that's a very important question. So let me start with small and go to the large risk. So I think obviously there are inherent risks to the use of any technology, and AI is no exception, but there are some specific aspects to the usage of AI, which I will emphasize here. So first of all, this is not a theoretical question. Insurance companies right now in France and elsewhere are pricing insurance policies related to AI risk. I was on a panel related to this just 2 days ago. So there are insurance policies being sold to companies for the damages that may result from misuse of AI or dysfunction of AI. Now, what can happen? Well, as I mentioned earlier, most of these AI algorithms have a sort of black box structure to them. So we understand somehow why they work and when they work, but not completely. So even when you train, for example, a neural network to do a certain task, it will do well on a range of tasks that you have in the test data, training data, but you are never certain exactly of what the output will be in all possible situations. So it may have undesirable behavior in certain situations that you haven't seen in the test data, for example. So this calls for some kind of stress testing of these tools just as you would stress test any other tool. And this is not really new. Think of, for example, airplanes. When people build airplanes, an airplane is a very complicated system. We understand roughly how it works, but you cannot predict exactly how the airplane will react in extreme situations. This is why, after having carefully designed the airplane, people do wind tunnel testing and actual flights before they deploy it. So here it's the same. You need to have some stress testing protocols and procedures for these algorithms to make sure they do what they are expected to do in certain situations. And then circumscribe their area of use to the situations where you think you understand how it works. This is not necessarily done systematically today, but this is how it should be done in areas where there's some risk to the misuse or rogue behavior of the algorithm. It can lead to damage and so on. Then a little bit more subtle is the fact that some categories of AI algorithms are so-called deterministic algorithms, meaning that once they have been trained, every time you run them with the same inputs, you will get the same outputs. But other categories of AI algorithms do not have this feature because there is a random character to the output, and this is typically the case of generative models. Generative models have a random feature in their output. When you run them 2 times, 10 times, 100 times with the same input, you may get different answers, and you will get 100 different answers. Sometimes slightly different answers, sometimes widely different answer. So there is a randomness inherent in the way generative models operate, which is on purpose. It's not a flaw, it's on purpose, but sometimes it leads to undesirable outputs called hallucinations. And in some cases, it's innocuous. Okay, if it generates a picture of a dog with 3 ears or 2 noses, okay, it's funny. But in some cases, especially if the output of the generative model is an input to something else, which then does a calculation or makes a decision, you may not see it, and it may be harder to check. So this is more serious, and hallucination risk has been debated largely, but it's not a technical flaw. It's something which is in the design, and the way you can reduce it is by giving more context to, for example, the input of an LLM. The more context you give, the more controlled is the output. But if you cannot completely avoid this. Then there is a third aspect which was referred to in the intervention by Frédéric, is the user-machine interface. So these are tools which are new. One of the interesting things about large language models is that anybody can interact with them because you interact with them in natural language. You don't need to be a computer scientist to use these LLMs because you speak to them in your own language. So it means they touch a wider range of users, but at the same time, most of these users have never interacted with such systems. Their expectations may be unrealistic. They may not know exactly how to use these systems. So there is a need for training, and this training is the basis for an orderly adoption and deployment of these systems on a large scale. This training is not really there in many large organizations today because they don't have the capacity to do this, or they don't have the people to do this. I think this is very important. For example, GARP, the Global Association of Risk Professionals, came to us last year. They asked us to design a certificate, some kind of training course for risk managers on AI for risk and risk of AI. It's not a very technical course. It's not a very complicated content, but they think that this is very important because risk managers have to use at some point AI tools, and they need to know what to do and what not to do. So this is something that I think needs to be done on a large scale. And if you don't do it, then you have a situation like the Boeing 737 MAX. So the Boeing, so you've probably heard of this airplane. Well, this airplane was designed with lots of automated features, but the pilots were not retrained to understand fully how these new features worked. And so the pilots were put into this new version of the plane, thinking that they could do as before. And so the accidents that occurred, and which led to, unfortunately, many deaths in that case, were not due to where there was a technical dysfunction, but the main problem was that the way it was configured, the pilots were not trained to understand these new features. So that's here. I think that's, I mean, maybe in this case, in the financial application is less dramatic, but still, I think the user interface is something that is very important. And the more complicated level, well, in large organizations such as financial institutions, AI tools and other classical algorithms are concurrently deployed across the organization. They interact through many channels. Currently, we don't have a very good understanding of these interactions and how these interactions may lead to undesirable behavior. Because these algorithms are developed in a sandbox, in a laboratory, or in some isolated situation where they are tested on static data and you look at their outputs, but in these organizations, they are in an organic structure where they interact together, and they haven't been tested in such environments. So we don't know how they may interact in this case. And one of the problems that have been discussed, for example, in this case, is algorithmic collusion. If you have, algorithms interacting in the market, how do they? Can they lead to undesirable outcomes that that have not been thought of when you run them on a standalone basis? So that's, I would think these are a range of different risks. But I will end with another type of risk, because you talked about the financial stability and so on. So I think one of the things that is not much to discuss in these panels, because they tend to focus on the technical aspect, is that most of the AI tools, I mean the large-scale AI tools and infrastructure today, are being provided to firms by a very small number of actors. There's a handful of actors. Most of them are large US-based companies, which are providing the environment for the deployment of AI tools in large firms. And so this is an issue, I think, because if you look at it from not just from a technical perspective, but from a political or political economy perspective, this creates a dependence, structural dependence. You have organizations which are becoming dependent on these infrastructures and platforms, and is this desirable for the organization and so on? So you mentioned that France has a very good ecosystem for AI engineers and so on, but when you look at French organizations, whether government or business, they are using platforms not developed by the French fintechs, but by these large operators. So I think this creates a kind of too big to fail situation in the tech area, which is strategically something that I would say a regulator or a government would need to think about. I think that's also a risk which is of another nature.
I'll let you come back on that one, Frédéric, in a second. But first, we're going to go to Pierre-Olivier. From your perspective, how are you seeing AI reshaping dynamics in markets? And I mean, is this affecting people's relationship to finance?
So the fundamental challenge we have to address is the scaling, as I mentioned. It's moving from experimentation to true scaling. And Wama, you mentioned a number of risks which will need to be addressed. I'm not going to take this angle. I'm going to go for a different angle. It's going to be first for the industry to be able to address the hardest of the trade-off, which is trust and control versus speed. I mean, Frédéric mentioned the speed at which AI was developing, the speed AI is offering, the speed of change. That's important to take into consideration, but the industry will have to act in a way which is also bringing the trust and bringing the control. And that's going to be a trade-off that people will have to manage. It will not be a simple trade-off. And at Capgemini, we see examples of companies which are holding out on large rollout of AI because they haven't solved what they believe are key elements around how they manage privacy, how they manage compliance, how they get comfortable with the models they'll be using. So first thing first, this is a trade-off. I don't think there is a perfect answer to all of this, but that's going to be for the industry to manage a trade-off, trust/control versus speed. The second element to make things happen is going to be about moving from making things technically possible, making things technically work, to making things having a lasting business sense. We should never forget that at the end of the day, technology is a means, and I'm going to give you the usual quote, which is, it's a means to an end, and the end is a lasting. And I use the word lasting because lasting means it has to be done in the interest of all stakeholders and in a way which can last and is sustainable. And to do this, it's about thinking through the business case, what it means, its efficiency, its customer experience, its revenues, how you trigger a nice and gentle virtuous circle around this, and you get things moving, and you think through what are you really getting in terms of productivity, because something to not to forget is productivity so far generated by AI is not that big. Numbers we have at Capgemini are around 7%. If you want things to work in a meaningful way at large scale, this will have to go beyond to help making sure there is reinvestment. And the last point, which for me is the most important, is the success of AI adoption is not technical. It's not purely technical. It's going to be deeply human. And I think, Valérie, you mentioned the human. We all mentioned the human. We can optimize models. We can fine-tune parameters. We can scale infrastructure. What you cannot code, if I use the word, you cannot code curiosity of people. You cannot code the fact that they feel comfortable about using the technology. You cannot code empathy. And all these elements will have to be there, which means education, which means training, which means reinforcing the ability of people to be comfortable with the technology. That's why at the end of the day, the change will come from the people and from the cultural transformation we have to do all together to bring this technology to be really a means to a lasting business end.
Well, I certainly have a curiosity to hear now from Valérie. In terms of the risks from Amundi's perspective, I mean, what are the perceived risks here, and what's your risk management approach for them?
I will answer on the risk, and then I would like to say a word on what Pierre-Olivier just said, because I think it's absolutely essential. Well, the risks, I was mentioning the security of the company's data and the way we handle it. There is a risk in the model bias. Let me give you an example. When our analysts are looking at geopolitical data to have a view of what's going on in the world, what's getting out of the machine depends a lot on where the model have been trained. Typically on that front, we make sure that we have several models, including one French one at Amundi, but some coming from the US, some coming from Asia as well. I think it's essential to have several models running to avoid as much bias as possible. So the quality of data is an essential topic we have to deal with in a company like Amundi. Because like with AI, like any other system, you know this motto, garbage in, garbage out. When you input bad data in your system, you get bad results at the end of it. So it's actually quite virtuous in companies like us who are using billions of data, this AI utilization, because we actually are working very seriously on the data today thanks to AI. One point I would call decentralized innovation is a sort of risk. It's something you addressed before, whether it was a middle office, back office, or front office. They were asking to the IT team something which was quite clear. The IT team was coming with a feedback. In the middle, there has been risk, compliance, everybody had control. What was the output? Now we are decentralizing part of this innovation or these new things. So there is a true new role for risk managers within I very much agree with what you said, in our organizations. And I'm happy to hear that there is a certificate at Oxford. I will use it, because I think that risk managers can gain a lot of time in controlling things much more efficiently than what they used to, but they need to use this time to make sure that the way we work with AI is a safe way for the organization and for our clients. So I think it's a true new role. We're working a lot with our risk teams on that, and I think it's essential. And the last one is cost. I'm sorry to say, but I think it's important to mention. For the time being, I'm quite positively surprised. My fear in the very beginning was that by using AI, we will make some savings in productivity for a lot of things, but it would cost much more on the other side. For the time being, it's not the case, but for all the people who run business in the room, I think it's very important to monitor this thing as well. And then to go back to Pierre-Olivier's point, I do not believe in either a top-down or bottom-up exercise in terms of AI. I think it's essential to let a bottom-up capacity, so people taking care of the tool, using it as of today. I mean, for instance, I'm monitoring the pace of usage of Alto Studio within our teams, and as of today at Amundi, we have more than close to 50% of the teams worldwide which are using Alto Studio regularly, at least several times a week, which I think is quite good considering the fact that it was released quite recently. So it's essential to let our staff improving their own job cleverly. But at the same time, for all the big process that we need to put at scale, you need change management and you need some top-down exercise as well. And it's not so much change management in terms of improving the technology, it's really change management on the human side, training, changing the organization, changing sometimes the job of the people who have to be deployed on something else. So it's actually a very heavy task to make sure that you get the best out of it in a large organization.
Thank you. Frederic, I'll let you have the last word before we open to some audience questions. Obviously, there's been a lot said here on concentration risks, on non-EU tech providers. I'm sure you'll want to touch on that. But I also want to ask you about safeguards. And what kind of safeguards do you think financial institutions should be putting in place to ensure that they're using AI responsibly?
Thank you. So responsible AI is really key, and we are promoting that at Microsoft, really on the ethical point of view. I fully agree with Valérie. The most important is to provide the AI tools, and Alto Studio is a good tool for the Amundi employees and all the AI tools. Regarding the risk, I think that Ramat mentioned many risks, and I fully agree on all these risks. Maybe first on regarding dependence, you're perfectly right. It's a key point. I think that at Microsoft we provide on our platform all the main LLMs, including Mistral, so you can decide which LLMs you want to use. We also provide sovereign cloud with Capgemini and Orange. So, and Microsoft is not a shareholder of Blue, so it's a fully sovereign solution. And regarding dependence and sovereignty, I think that we need to also look at the new risk. And one of the new risks is state cyber attack and also attack. You can say I'm perfectly safe because I have an on-prem data center. Look at the recent war. The first target is energy infrastructure and physical data centers. So it's important to anticipate all kinds of risks, and it can be also basic risks such as fire or earthquakes. Regarding the responsible AI, I will say that Ramat clearly mentioned that it's a new kind of Gen AI. When I started my career at BNP Paribas in the 90s, we were practicing AI with coding, but it was only a few engineers. If you ask your kids if they are using ChatGPT, they are using ChatGPT on a daily basis. And it's a challenge when you have employees using AI because 80% of the employees on under 30 years old are using AI on a daily basis. So if you don't do what Valérie is doing, providing the AI tools, you will have shadow IT. And for me, this is the biggest risk, is that you can say, I'm perfectly safe, I'm perfectly compliant, I respect all the regulations, and it's perfect. But today, especially after COVID, people spend a part of their work at home with two computers, the computer of the company and another computer. And if you don't provide the AI tools, mechanically, they will use the AI tools on their personal computer, which is, for me, the largest risk today. Lastly, I think that it's very difficult today to know what will be the main risk of AI. AI today, LLMs are 3 years old. ChatGPT, it's November 22. It's like internet in the 97. Okay, in 97, you didn't have social media, you didn't have search engines. So it's very difficult to know what will be AI in the future. And I think that regarding regulation and what we can do is very difficult. If you take internet, we, I think, over-regulated at the beginning of the internet, and today we under-regulated. If you take social media with teenagers, we should regulate much more. I think this is the main challenge we have today, is regulation is super important, but it's when we need to regulate. And regarding responsible AI, for me, the challenge is, of course, the tech part, is, of course, the compliance and governance in companies, but it's mainly how you recruit people and how you train people. This is the most important will be the human component regarding the risk and fraud regarding AI. Is really the people you have in your team. Are they reliable? Are they making your company, your bank, resilient?
Thank you so much. We have just a couple of minutes left for audience questions. So if anybody has a question, please stick your hand up. If not, I'll do a quick fire round with our panelists, but this is your last chance. Okay. In that case, I have a question. I would just like to do a very brief, maximum 1 minute answer from each of you on what do you think the most important next step is for responsible use of AI in finance? Who wants to go first?
I can start. For me, the most important is collaboration. I think that it's a new technology, and I'm very pleased to speak here. I think that we need to collaborate very strongly with the regulators, with banks, with tech companies, because we are in a new trend, and the more we collaborate, the more we share usage of these new technologies, the better we can regulate, and the better we can have an ecosystem in the financial services, which is very strongly resilient.
Yeah, I would like to add to this.
Ahead.
So I think a big challenge is the governance of AI models, especially here we're in presence of regulators. So governance means who owns the AI model in the organization, who is responsible for the outputs and behavior of the AI model, how does this link with conduct risk, for example. And this is really a legal issue. I mean, people have not figured this out in certain situations. And also, we heard on this panel that in some organizations, a human has to absolutely make the decision at the end of the decision chain. Well, that's not always possible. In large financial institutions that I'm familiar with, algorithms are swallowing data, terabytes of data, and spitting out terabytes of data as we speak. So a human cannot possibly validate every output. So technology must be part of the monitoring process, must be part of the validation process. Something that spits out terabytes of data can only be controlled and validated and monitored by another algorithm. Could be a classical algorithm, could be AI, but technology must also be deployed in the monitoring and validation of these algorithms. And so I think these two are very important questions that haven't been yet clarified, because the adoption of AI is a very fast process, so people haven't had time to really reflect on these issues.
Valerie, you had something.
Yes, I was going to answer governance as well, but with a slightly different idea. Not so much on the legal aspect. You're right, there is a legal aspect, but for me, it's not the main one. The main one is to make sure that you implement a governance within your organization to make sure that you, one, know what's going on, whether it is top-down or bottom-up. And unfortunately, it has to be the old way, huh? A monthly committee with a lot of people around the table. By the way, at our AI monthly committee, and there are several in between, but We have the top level of the company, we have the risk, we have the compliance, we have the IT, and we have the businesses, we have the middle office, because we want the whole organization to be aware about what's moving and what new type of controls we must implement to make sure that we are knowing what we do. It's as simply as that. So I think we need to embrace these new technologies because they are so powerful and so efficient and so actually helping for our teams and value added for our clients. But we must never lose the control of what we are doing in our organization, so it does require some formal governance.
Pierre-Olivier, last word.
That's the most difficult. As I agree with my colleagues, I'm not going to say anything about what they've covered. I would add another angle, which is let's not forget the unintended consequences. And let's make sure we manage them. And if I use a very trivial example, you can imagine AI, Gen AI, generating a lot of analysis, just for the sake of analysis. I don't think that's the world we want. So let's think unintended consequences as well.
Okay, I'm not even going to try to sum up all of the content that we've discussed in the last hour. I think I'll just say this. The uptake of AI in finance, it's not going to be easy, but it's definitely going to be interesting to see how it happens. Thank you so much for joining me. Let's have a hand for the panelists.